David Abrahamovitch, one of the UK's up-and-coming entrepreneurial stars, the founder of Grind Coffee, one of the fastest growing coffee companies in the UK, is going to be on the podcast today sharing his knowledge with you. He's built a £20 million turnover business in a very short period of time, just raised £22 million to take his brand global, and you don't want to miss today's podcast. The learnings are phenomenal. Our mission is to help 10 million people start and grow a business for free. We want nothing from you. In Pep Talk, we interview industry-leading experts from around the world who share actionable know-how and life lessons. That's why we're excited to partner with GoDaddy to power up Pep Talk. I've been using GoDaddy for years and would promote them on this podcast even if they didn't sponsor us. You can use their free website builder and start your online business at no cost, and even get help these days with naming your business. For 40% off GoDaddy tools, click the link in the podcast notes below and use the code GDXPepTalk. David, welcome to the podcast. Perhaps you could start off by telling us, if people meet you for the first time at dinner and you're explaining who you are and what you do, share with us how you do that.
I usually just tell them I'm a barista and I make coffee for a living. But there's a little bit more to it than that. So in 2011, I took over my dad's old mobile phone shop and turned it into a coffee shop as a bit of fun, as a bit of a side project around some other things that I was doing at the time. That then kind of grew legs of its own. You know, we called the first one Shoreditch Grind. And over the next 10 years, that evolved into a hospitality business called Grind with cafes, bars and restaurants and other stuff across London, locations across London. And then in 2019, we decided to start making consumer products, consumer coffee products for people to drink at home. Most importantly are compostable pods, which fit in Nespresso machines. And without really knowing, obviously, what was around the corner in 2020, that became a fairly pivotal moment. And the sales of our coffee pods grew extraordinarily through lockdown. We completed some large fundraising last year, and we kind of emerged from the pandemic as primarily a direct-to-consumer coffee pod company with an amazing high street presence as well.
You're very humble as well, because for my US listeners, the way I look at your business, you've got 7 of the best restaurants and cafes in London, without doubt, in my view. You only have to look at the ratings to see that.
Thank you.
And you've, in the last year, built a brand new division of that business under the restrictions of COVID, which is hitting a 10 million turnover. So the coffee shop business is a 10 million turnover. You've got £20 million, not dollar, for my US friends, it's a little bit more, £20 million business, and you're just getting started. You just raised a huge amount of money to go all at this and scale this brand. And it's incredibly exciting. And I think today what I want for the audience to learn from you, one of the main things I think, is how to win against big brands. So much of our audience listen to or hear these big brands dominating the market, and you're literally going to and are already breaking through. And so I want to learn from you today. I want my audience to learn from you today. How have you done that? Now you explain your progression there and how you've kind of moved now into the B2C business, I guess, and the pod business. And there was one thing there, the patent dropped, didn't it, for Nespresso? Was that something you noticed?
Yeah, that's right.
Took advantage of?
That happened quite a long time ago. Yeah, they lost an antitrust case. In the same way that it's not fair to make printers and flood the market with very cheap printers and then sell very expensive ink that only you can buy. It was a similar kind of anti-competitive practice case that Nestle lost, more than a decade ago now.
Yeah, and it's kind of exciting, isn't it? That's another example of going against the big boys, because I'm sure they're fighting hard to make sure that it's their pods that get used in all machines. But just taking a step back before we go and share with people how to beat big brands, talk to us a little bit about your upbringing. Do you think your father was clearly an entrepreneur? I want to know what that was like, and I also want to understand a little bit about why you didn't keep the first store a phone shop. I feel like that's probably quite a good business. What made you change?
Yeah, look, I think I was very fortunate. My parents were kind of working class, but sent me to an amazing school, and they kind of emerged from the East End of London. Kind of, did well, done good, as they say in East London. And yeah, my dad was very entrepreneurial. He had market stalls selling clothes, which he imported from Italy in like the late 70s and early 80s, because, that was what you did at the time to go and get the kind of latest amazing fashion. You didn't go to shops, you went to market stalls for people who were bringing it over from places like Italy. That evolved into like actual physical clothes shops from market stores. And then kind of in the early to mid 80s, around the time I was born, he decided to leave clothes and move into mobile phones. And at the time, that was, Beverly Hills Cop style, big things like that with a wire on them and an aerial on the back of the car. It really was the early days. But I think, he thought mobile phones were going to be big, and and he was correct in that analysis. It's fair to say. And look, I think what I learned from him was that you don't have to do as you're told always. I think that would probably be the main thing. It's okay to go against the grain. You don't have to be an employee, turn up, say yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full, and then leave again. You can do your own thing, and you can make your own way. And I think probably it was that attitude and that approach to life, which is probably the thing that I learned the most from him. And then I think counterbalancing that nicely was my mum, who is a bit more sensible and a bit more of a completer finisher, if you believe in Myers-Briggs or something it's called, I think. That it's important to finish what you start, and it's important to be a bit more diligent and a bit more, I think it's fair to say that my dad could sometimes be a little bit of a good at starting, not so good at finishing. So I think, hopefully I've got a nice background of a nice mix of those two things. But, I think one thing I always say is that, when I look back, I went to this amazing school, but it was, basically you were channeled into one of about 5 things. It was, here's the 5 to 10 universities it's acceptable for you to go to, and here's the 10 to 15 careers it's acceptable for you to have. And no one talked once about starting your own business. And I have promised that at some point I'm going to go back to the school, and I'm going to do, I'm doing a few things with UCL as well, which University College London, where I went to uni, about kind of encouraging entrepreneurship. So I think it was a real shame that we were encouraged so much to just be a management consultant or a lawyer or a doctor or something else, and not have our eyes open to actually, do you know what? You could have a lot of fun and create a lot of value and do something really good if you go and do something for yourself.
It's so insane, isn't it? I feel like the question at school is still being asked wrong. It's not what will you be when you grow up, but what problem will you solve? And it seems to me that that system definitely needs fixing. And having someone like yourself, even just going into the schools you came from and sharing that, I think will actually make a huge difference, create a butterfly effect, because it needs to change. But how come you didn't fall into the trap? How come you didn't fall into that system?
I did actually. I went and did an internship at one of the very large banks. I actually did 2 internship programs at a couple of the big banks. And look, they were great, and I was treated really, really well and given amazing opportunities, and I learned a lot. But I also learned very, very quickly that I did not want to go and work for a massive corporate organization. Actually, that was really valuable as an exercise in figuring out what I don't want. And then what happened in parallel to that, a friend of mine, my best mate from school, started helping out a couple of guys who had a really early stage business. And he then brought me in, and we became a founding team of 4. This was a technology business in the insurance and mediation space, something I knew nothing about, but I was excited about being part of a small business, and I was quite into tech, and I knew enough that we could be helpful. And we became a founding team of 4, learned a lot very fast, and we went and raised a lot of money from a venture capital firm very early. So that kind of became my full-time job during my 3rd year of uni. And then I did that, I was working on that business for about 5 years or so. And then in the end, I took over the phone shop and turned it into Shoreditch Grind, ran both of those companies for about 2 years before leaving the other business and going full-time to focus on Grind.
And was the phone business no longer working, or did you just personally, it didn't fit with what you wanted to do? What was the reason for the change?
Well, yeah, unfortunately, my dad got sick unexpectedly, and then he passed away when I was 25. So that was kind of the catalyst for taking over the business. And I think obviously as he was trying to get better, he didn't focus on that business, so it wasn't in particularly great shape. But equally, the selling of mobile phones had gone from a bit of had gone from a specialist sale to a commodity sale. Everyone by that point just wanted an iPhone in a box as cheaply and as easily as possible. So kind of the space for the space for B2B phone management, I think, was just a space which was kind of dying and being consolidated. So look, I think it was the right time to exit that, and I certainly didn't explore keeping that business. But I loved the building. Anyone who knows the building, it's a small circular building right on, like literally on the edge of Old Street Roundabout. I used to work in there when it was a phone shop upstairs, repairing, Nokia 8210s, and for people that remember those, and the original Nokia phones when Nokia ruled the world. And I did that and sold phone covers and stuff downstairs as a summer job when I was 13 and 14. And that had a huge amount of sentimental value, that building. So I definitely wanted to keep it. And also, this was 2011. The Olympics were coming in 2012 to East London. Shoreditch was the place to be. The centre of London was being pulled east. You could feel it. And Old Street had gone from this kind of weird roundabout city fringe thing to, this is Old Street. This is Silicon Roundabout now. There are unicorns and even decacorns being born here by guys on laptops. This is a really exciting place to be. So, I think a big part of what of any success that we've had has been, we were right place, right time, and very, very lucky to start with such an amazing building on the roundabout that, obviously we still have now.
I've spent a lot of time in that cafe myself, and for people listening overseas, you should go Google it. There's some amazing energy there too. It's in the US, people know Silicon Valley very well. Shoreditch is becoming Silicon Roundabout, we call it, and your business sits on that roundabout, your first store. So there's some real interesting energy around all of that. I just want to take a moment to thank Taylor Brands for sponsoring this podcast. Have you ever been told you can easily start a business that will make money while you sleep, only to realize it takes a ton of work to get a business started? Taylor Brands makes starting a business easy. With its AI-powered platform, you can get your business a logo, social media designs, printed merchandise, and so much more, all in just a few clicks. That's why I love Taylor Brands. Whatever your idea is, you can make it look legit in a day and actually start selling through the Taylor Brands platform. For 40% off your first order, check out the links in the podcast notes below and use the code PEP. Now, let's get back to the podcast. Just one thing I want to quickly go back to before we move to how to beat big brands. I think what you mentioned there, I don't want my audience to miss, is around how almost your parents' family life is like a business. You mentioned Myers-Briggs there, but the dynamics between your mum and dad, very important to have those different people around you, maybe with the same moral code. I guess I wonder if that's translated into how you run your business today, because I know you started this business grind with a partner, and so I'm sure you were probably bringing someone in who covered your weaknesses.
Yeah, so I set up the first store with a friend from Melbourne, a DJ called Kaz, and he's not involved on a day-to-day basis now, but he helped set up the first couple of stores. And what he bought was the thing that I was missing, which was a deep knowledge and understanding of the independent coffee scene. Flat white culture. Well, if you ask an Australian, they'll say flat white culture comes from Melbourne. If you ask someone from New Zealand, they'll say it comes from there, but it certainly comes from that part of the world. And growing up in that, as Kaz did, immersed in this cafe culture that is so prevalent there. He moved here to when he signed for Universal Records, and he literally just could not get his head around the lack of cafes and the lack of this culture, and that everyone went to Starbucks or Costa or somewhere like that and ordered these big cups of coffee with various other things in them, and he just didn't understand that. And he had a very clear vision of this is the equipment we should use, this is how it should taste, this is the cups we should use, this is and he was much clearer on that at the time than I was. I kind of understood the opportunity and I'd seen that around the world, but I didn't have such clear views. And he actually drove me mad at the beginning because, we arranged to have someone else roast coffee for us and brand it up ourselves because, from the beginning, this was about building a brand. And even if it was only going to be one store, it was going to still be a brand. And we didn't want to promote someone else's coffee brand. So we found someone to work with to roast it and bag it with our logo on it. But, the amount of time Kaz spent on that, it was driving me mad. I was like, Kaz, we need to open. We've got no money. Like in fact, we passed having no money left 6 months ago. We are beyond running on fumes. But he was absolutely right to insist that we got it right and we got the training correct and we got the product correct before we opened. And he absolutely brought that to the table in the beginning. And he had a great eye for how the store should look and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was very complimentary.
One of the reasons I think you're a great leader is and I've been following you for quite a few years, but one of the things I really love is what you've just done there is that you've admitted you were wrong about something, like you wanted to get it open. I think a lot of entrepreneurs listening will have that urge, but you realized that someone else was right to say, let's get this foundation right. Because from this foundation that was built back then, you can build the pod business and the home delivery product and the customer loyalty. And I think this is a really important thing for people not to miss, right? Being able to also accept that you might have a business instinct, but listening to people that know something that you don't is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I've never understood. The whole point of my job has always been to employ people who are better at their individual skill set than I am. And what's so difficult in the early days is, in the early days, I was CEO and finance director and HR director and head of operations and head of training and head of digital and all these other things that we now, have someone in each of those roles and many more. What's difficult at the start is that you have to be a generalist and you have to do all of those roles because obviously you don't have the resources to employ people to do all of these things. But what's great as you go through is you do get the resources and you can actually employ these experts to take on all of these roles. And I've never found it difficult to admit that obviously our operations director is going to be a better operations director than I ever was. Like that's the whole point, isn't it? To get to the point where you can employ these experts. And then what you have to do as an organization grows and grows and grows, and we're 300 people or so now, you have to be responsible for the culture and you have to be responsible for occasionally making some big decisions with the help of your board about, are we going to do this? Are we going to do that? Are we going to decide? You have to be able to make it and back yourself on those decisions. And then you have to be able to get all of these people who are experts and point them all in the same direction because, they can run a lot faster and a lot harder together collectively than you ever could on your own. But you have to make sure that everyone's going in the same direction. And that's not always easy, particularly in a business as we have, which is now kind of split into two halves.
Yeah, no, and I think, but again, I don't want the audience to miss this very important insight. I think a lot of people do actually stop their business from growing and competing with the big boys because they are the stumbling block. They if you're a generalist, you actually can get quite good at things and you then don't realize that you're not necessarily the best at things. And I think that's what stops people's businesses growing. They get in their own way. Self-sabotage, I think is how my wife describes it. But look, I wanted to talk a little bit about get into the detail a little bit about how you're managing to build this brand. I was in Greenwich recently, and the queues to get into your place were around the block, and then Starbucks was pretty much empty. So you're beating the big boys here in the UK. You're planning to expand into the US. How do you think you're going to compete against mainstream brands like Starbucks as you scale? And what does Grind have that they don't?
Yeah, look, I think Starbucks is a phenomenal business and has got scale, beyond all imagination. I think in certain parts of the world, people are increasingly looking for an alternative. And I think it's important to note as well that we do breakfast, lunch, dinner, coffee, and cocktails, whereas somewhere like the big coffee chains are focused just on one product. But look, as we go into the US, we are very much launching there as a D2C brand primarily, a direct to consumer brand, i.e. almost all of our efforts will be focused on getting to people to buy our coffee and shipping it to them to enjoy at home. Obviously, we'll support that with physical activity. So we partnered with Soho House Group, who are, if anyone hasn't heard of them, they have about 50 or 60 members clubs around the world that are very large clubs with, usually with swimming pools on the roof and lots of hotel rooms. And they're probably, for me, the leading hospitality brand in the world in terms of, the coolest, most desirable, executing at a very, very high standard. So we partner with them globally to supply coffee to all of those locations, which is an amazing deal for us. And it gets their members, they have 130,000 members or so. It gets them all exposed to grind coffee because they drink it inside, served in a cup, or when they stay in the hotels, they have our coffee pods in the room. So, so we're already in the US serving customers grind coffee physically via our partnership with Soho House, which is spread right across the US. And, we started to partner with a few other hotels. I think we're in the Line, Sagaro hotels, a few others. And we're in a couple of kind of premium supermarkets there as well, like Air One Markets in California would be a good example of that. So we're starting to kind of dip our toe in physically. And then, we hope to open a few stores here and there over the next couple of years. But, there'll be flagship stores in key cities where you can come and get a flat white and you can come and buy some Nespresso pods and have a go on our coffee machine that you can buy for use at home. So there'll be brand building kind of flagship stores. We're very much not going for a let's build thousands of stores in the US and take on Starbucks, because that would be a huge undertaking, and that's not really what we're about now. We're about letting people make sustainable, amazing coffee at home.
It's a fascinating process. Do you think that when businesses are listening to this podcast, founders of companies, B2B sales and B2B businesses are a little bit underrated? Like you've got this B2C business. A lot of people dream of having that, a popular coffee shop, like that's to a lot of people, that's the dream, right? But this B2B side, as you, and then you're saying B2C, which is interesting because, they kind of feed each other, don't they? If you look at brands like Oatly, how they've managed to rise up, they basically gave it to all the coffee shops, right? And they built a B2B business that then built a B2C business. So there seems to be some almost like business secret there about building you're aligning with a brand like Soho House, which you respect, you feel you have common brand DNA, and that lifts you both up, right?
Yeah, look, I think the lines between B2B and D2C, we call it direct to consumer or business to consumer, whatever. But, I think the lines between B2B and B2C, if you like, are forever blurring, particularly now. Our homes are our offices, particularly, even if it's for 1 day a week, 2 days a week, it's now a mainstream thing that our homes are our offices. So, of course, the lines are going to continue to blur even more. And look, the people making decisions in businesses are just consumers at the end of the day. So, you might be making a decision about, if we're going to stop grind or not because you work at a hotel or because you work at a premium supermarket, but you're making that decision because you like the product or not. And that same decision-making process applies when you're choosing what to consume yourself as well. So, we see these outlets as a great way to just introduce people to the brand. For me, what happens is that once someone gets one of our pink coffee tins, which there is one here, and tries our, Nespresso compatible pods, they rarely go back to buying pods from somewhere else. So, the challenge for us is to get as many people as possible trying our coffee and believing that they should trust us with their coffee at home because we do a good job. And so we demonstrate that through the product and then also through doing it in real life. Because I think one of the things, you've seen a huge boom in D2C brands, but a lot of these brands are just people buying stuff off Alibaba in China, repackaging it into a nice packet and then putting it through people's letterboxes. And look, that's great and it has its place, and a lot of people have done a great job of doing that. But it doesn't necessarily inspire the customer to believe in, the authenticity of the brand or the pedigree of the brand. And I think, we have real authenticity. We've been doing this for 11 years now on the high street. We serve some of the world's most demanding customers, busy Londoners in Shoreditch, in Soho, in Covent Garden, in places, London Bridge. We serve a million plus cups of coffee to them in their hands in real life, every year. And so, it takes some doing to do that. It's not easy at scale. And so we think that's a really valuable story that we want to tell people. This is why you should choose Grind at Home, because we can also do it in real life. And we really do roast all of our coffee ourselves in Bermondsey, and here's a video of it. So the physical stuff has a real value in the digital world, even if you don't actually get to visit it, just by being able to see it and being bought into the story.
I love it. I didn't ask you this in advance, but I wonder if you'd be up for this. I'd love it if you could give 1 hour mentorship to one of our listeners. And for the listeners to win it, they need to take a picture of themselves having a coffee and tag Grind and tag the Purposeful Project. Are you up for that?
I would have said yes, but I definitely can't say no now, can
I? Thanks, Dave. That would be amazing. I think your mentorship would mean a lot to our listeners. So if you'd like to buy some Grind coffee, I could totally personally recommend it. I literally have every single day a few cups, and it makes me feel good. You should get the links below and help yourself. And David, I want to thank you for taking time to share your story and keep being an inspiration. Thanks for leading the charge in the UK and now the rest of the world, showing what entrepreneurs here in the UK can do.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me, and I'll set you up a code for your listeners as well with a nice introductory offer.
Perfect. That's amazing. We always like a good deal on coffee. Why not? Especially when it's as good as the coffee you produce. Thanks, David. Thanks for listening to Pep Talk. We hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to follow the Purposeful Project on all our social media channels, where we're giving away even more free business secrets and entrepreneurial value. Again, we'd like to thank our sponsor GoDaddy for powering this podcast. From naming a business to buying a domain name to building your website for free, GoDaddy has you covered. For 40% off GoDaddy tools, click the link in the podcast note below and use the code GDXPepTalk. See you next time, entrepreneurs, and remember, you're not alone.